I get the icon in cornflower blue?
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 14 of Can I Get That Software in Blue? I'm one of your hosts, Chad Tindel, and as always, I'm pleased to be joined by my co-host, the MVP of VPs, the Sultana of Grafana, Steve, I hate elevator music, Mayzak.
I love it. This is the best intro ever. Thanks, Chad. Welcome, everybody.
We're pleased to be joined today by a special guest. It's actually a bit of an Elastic reunion today because we all worked together there many, many years ago. Calling all the way in from Berlin, she's received much praise for her recent fundraise. The founder who puts the ace in database, CEO of the hot new serverless NoSQL database, Zata, Monica Sarbu. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure, and I very appreciate the introduction.
Nice work. So, Monica, it's been a while since we've talked, but it's nice to see you and catch up, and we're going to do it in front of everybody. So hopefully folks will learn about your company and we can get to know you a little bit better. I think it'd be interesting to kind of just start the conversation by talking about a little bit about your career and how you went from developer to architect to, co-founding and being the CEO of PacketBeat. You've done a lot of stuff since then, of course, too, but I'd love just kind of hear about your journey a little bit.
Yeah, so I studied computer science, and then after that, I decided to work for a small startup here in Berlin, and I think this was the best decision because at the startup you wear different hats. So I was not only writing code, but also be part in support trainings and sales meetings. And this kind of allowed me to develop myself in different directions. And then afterwards, the startup that I was working on, so we were building a monitoring solution in the telecom space. This was acquired twice. So first it was acquired by a company in the US, Acme Packet, and then Acme Packet was acquired by Oracle. And then I decided to quit my job and start my own company. So I created PacketBeat, which is one of the first open source monitoring solution at that time that was looking at data traffic in order to monitor your infrastructure. And after 2 years, this was acquired by Elastic, and this is how I ended up being part of Elastic's family. At Elastic, I had the opportunity to kind of be able to grow more of these agents that you install on your server, and they collect all kinds of operational data, metrics, logs, and so on. And Beats grew quite a lot, and we had over 300 million cumulative downloads in just 3 years. We are one of the most downloaded products at Elastic. We had an incredible community. And after that, I decided to do something good for the society. And I created this nonprofit organization called Tubo.io that offers free mentorship for underrepresented groups in tech. And basically what we had to do is basically to match mentees with mentors. And this is how the idea of Zata came. It was kind of unexpectedly for me as well. So we were deciding to build this platform to make it easier to connect the mentors with mentees. And when we were looking for databases and what kind of database we can use, we realized there isn't really a good database out there that is easy to use. So in the end, we decided to go with Airtable that allows us to build easier and faster. In just a few weeks, we had a mentorship platform for Tupo. And this is the moment when I realized that there is a huge opportunity on the market to build a database service that is easy to use, easy to get started, that comes with a developer experience and provides all the functionality that you need as a company to build your own business logic. So this is how the journey of Zata started.
That's awesome. So I had read that you started that nonprofit, and I just wanted to comment on it and say that I think it's really cool that you have taken your success and you're now turning around and giving back as much as you can, especially to underrepresented folks. And I think that's a philosophy that we share. And I learned that a little bit about you when we were at Elastic together. It just seems like there's a lot of folks that we work with together that have that same kind of philosophy. And, at Elastic, we focused a lot on diversity and inclusion and things like that. So I think that's pretty cool. It's inspiring. Maybe one day I can do that for pre-sales engineers. So when you think about your journey from moving from an architect and developer to a CEO, like how did you go through that mind shift? Was it scary to make that jump and transition? And then I'd love to hear some maybe hard fought lessons or hard learned lessons from your early days as a founder and CEO.
No, I think for me it wasn't really a different in a sense that I always think about the goal. So I have a goal, and then I'm able to do whatever is needed to reach that goal. And if that means that you need to write documentation, or if you need to write code, or if you have to be in sales calls, or no matter what this requires, I want to reach this goal. And I'm always oriented person. I definitely, as I grew in my career, or as I progressed in my career, I started to kind of learn from my experiences, and I started to kind of become more easier to take decisions and to kind of have different way of seeing things, like a broader view. What's different now is how my day-to-day work looks like, but the goal is always there.
So, as you've gone through your journey and growth, have you found mentors that have helped you along the way, and what networks do you draw on for that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So, unfortunately, I didn't have any mentor in my career. And I get this question quite often because people assume that I had a mentor because I started this mentorship program. But the motivation for Chupu was that, I had the opportunity in the last years to be part of these conferences, women in tech conferences, and I've seen and I heard so many stories, and you hear these stories over and over that you start your career in tech, and then after a few years you feel like you're not promoted to a senior software engineer, and then you start working harder, and then often you get into depression. So this is how kind of motivated me to start Tupu, in order to be able to support others in tech. If you are part of an unhealthy organization, it's just a matter of having the courage, on having someone to support you, to have the courage to change your job and not leave tech just because you are in an unhealthy environment.
You made a bunch of interesting points, but one of them I want to dig in on a little bit is like finding the courage to change jobs and stay in the industry. I've noticed with, folks like SDRs, the sales development reps are called user success or community success in a lot of different organizations, but I've worked with a lot of them over the years, and some of them have, run into challenges where they're like, I don't know if this is the right industry for me. And a lot of it comes down to, first, I guess, just kind of their expectations, and maybe they set their expectations incorrectly, or they had them set incorrectly. But I think a lot of it comes down to culture. And I'm curious from your perspective, like when you think about Tupu, especially, how do you mentor and teach people about what good culture looks like versus what toxic culture looks like?
In the end, I think it's always about the manager. If the manager is supporting you in growing in your career, and if you are doing something wrong, then it has to be there for you. I think there are multiple reasons. So statistics say that 50% of women are leaving tech by mid-level. And there are a few reasons for that. Unhealthy culture, like not being able to be supported and be promoted in your career. Motherhood, because it happens around the time you are by mid-level. Because you have the feeling if you try for 5 years or 7 years and you are working as a software engineer and you are not promoted, then you feel like I'm not doing a good job and maybe I should do something else. Sometimes you need to have a bit of guidance. Either I'm doing something wrong, or maybe there is a subjective decision from my manager that I'm maybe doing a good job, but maybe others are more entitled from their perspective to be promoted. I think an unhealthy culture is strictly correlated to the manager that you have.
It's interesting because when I started my career at Hewlett Packard, the group that I was in, the lab, which had like maybe, I don't know, 80 or 100 people in it, it was about 50-50 men and women. And so this was my first kind of impression right out of college was, oh, this is very even. And literally every single first level manager was a woman. And it felt very, I don't know what the word is, egalitarian. Like it was fine. But then when I started going to smaller companies, like I moved to Red Hat, and the solution architect group there maybe had 100 essays in it in North America and not a single woman. And I know at Elastic, we had a hard time hiring female essays. Not that we didn't try. A lot of times we made offers and they didn't accept. We did our best, but it does seem like in the startup world, it's harder to hire them for some reason. I don't know why.
women tend to be more risk adverse. So there is this feeling that if you are going and work for a startup, then you might need to work over hours, more hours. You might not have time to to have like for other activities. It will be difficult for you to have a work-life balance. But I think it's not really true for most of the startups out there. And I think there is also another problem here. I know from my own experience, it's very difficult to hire the first diversity candidate in a team. But I think it's so important to treat this with higher priority at the beginning when the team is small, because the more people you add into your team, the more difficult it will be. Imagine that you have already a 100 people team, all male. It will be so difficult to find someone that is willing to join the team, right? So I think you need to think about this as early as possible when you are a team of 10 maximum, right? And then, because I always get this question in the interview, how many women are you in the team? And if my answer is just me, then it's like there is a no from the beginning.
One of the things I have conversations with my managers about sometimes is like, well, on the hiring front, of course, it's always, hey, let's make sure the pipeline is like has underrepresented groups. I don't like to say diversity candidates, because like you could argue that a French guy that grew up in the Middle East is also diverse, but that's because I'm a white guy. So it's diverse to me. But I think on the gender topic, I had a manager say to me once, we should be investing a lot more in our female SEs. It's like, yeah, I agree. But first of all, are we investing in them equally? Like, do you feel like you're investing the same in the guy next to you as the woman next to you? And I think that was spawned a really interesting conversation about what it means to first get to equal, and then we can start talking about swinging that pendulum further and further over. And I find myself getting caught in this trap too. It's like, oh, I found a female SE on the team, I'm going to over-invest in them. It's like, I don't want to create a sense of unfairness, but at the same time, I'm trying to swing this pendulum and do everything I can in my career, which is, going to be over in 10 to 20 years, to make sure that I'm a part of the solution, not the problem. But again, I think, Chad, as you were saying, one of the hardest parts about being in the sales engineering org or in the world is that the culture in sales is different than it is in engineering. And that also works against us in some cases. So I'm trying to change that at the same time, which is just like one step at a time.
Yeah, it's a good segue to talk about her new company, Zata, which she told us means extended data. So I guess you could say it's Zata or Zata, but your board is entirely composed of females, right? And does that help in the hiring process?
Definitely. Yeah, so I'm very proud of that. It wasn't by intention like this, but we are very lucky to have a 100% female board. And we did a bit of research, and it looks like we are the first very technical company, dev tools type of company that has a 100% female board. So we are very proud of that.
We had a previous guest on, Dr. Lord, on episode 12, who was a startup founder as well, and she made sure when she was going through her funding rounds to make sure that she was using VCs or working with VCs who were from diverse and underrepresented groups as well. Did you do the same thing?
Yes, and so I wanted because I was the founder, the only founder, and also female, I wanted to have a very diverse investors or cap table, and basically from the seed round, I've tried and I put so much effort in having such a diversity, and it was very hard, I can tell you. We are oversubscribed, so we are a bit lucky in that front to be able to choose. But also, I'm very lucky with, and I'm very happy with how everything turned out. We have Neha from Confluent as investor. We also have Erica Brescia from ex-CEO from GitHub, and she's also in the board.
Yeah, and you recently raised $30 million for a Series A, so it's nice to see these Series A's getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, congrats.
Thank you.
Monica, tell us how you're going to spend all that money. What do you do as an executive, like when you get a round of funding? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so for us, it was very important to be able to build a stronger technical team and build a product, and to simplify radically the way developers are dealing with data.
I'd love to hear more about that, having worked at Cloudera and MongoDB and Elastic, and now I work on DynamoDB. I've been in the NoSQL space for a long time, so I'm really excited to learn what this product is, how it's different from what's out there.
Yeah, let's dig into the tech.
So imagine that you want to build a web application, and the first thing that you will do is that you will search for a database to store all your data. So MySQL, PostgreSQL, MongoDB. So you always have to do some research and decide
DynamoDB.
which one. Which one is the best, and then probably you also want to add some search, analytics, or reports as functionality in your product. And so probably you need to add something like Elasticsearch in the picture, and then you have to synchronize the data between your database and Elasticsearch. And for that, probably you have to add a queue like Kafka. And as you grow as a product, then you also need to add a caching layer. So probably you have to add Redis. So imagine that you are starting to build this the entire data infrastructure in order to be able to build a product on top. And I've seen companies, every company out there is basically reinventing the wheel. So I was thinking myself, why every company out there needs to reinvent the wheel and not offer all this functionality under a simple API. So this is what we are trying to achieve with Zata. And so in addition, we want to make it so easy to use. You don't have to be a developer that really needs to understand how a database works in order to be able to use and manage one in production. So now it's kind of common for UI developers to deploy their application, their web application, with just pushing their code in with Git, and then they can use something like Netlify or Vercel for that. But I think the missing piece of that is like if you want to build a dynamic web application, it's like where do you store the data? So it's kind of missing the missing piece from the puzzle that I think with this we allow UI developers to have superpowers to be able to build web applications that they were not able to build before.
Would you say that your database is a combination of an operational data store combined with something like Elasticsearch and queuing and caching all built in, like all four of those are together?
Yes, exactly. So like this is very common, right? So there are companies out there that spend like up to 90% of their time. I know startups that, and like building the whole data infrastructure from scratch. We want to allow companies to not spend time and resources on building the data infrastructure and try to concentrate in building the business logic of their product. So, companies like Google and big tech organizations, for them, it's easier to attract good technical people that have the knowledge to build this data infrastructure. But for other companies that are maybe not so tech oriented, it's very difficult for them to attract good technical people. So what happens for them usually, they tend to outsource this part. And you can imagine it's always a problem. The future, I think, is going to the direction that you don't have to build a big team in order to be able to build the product that your startup wants. Because, as you see, like there is a shortage in hiring good technical people. So basically, we want to empower that everyone can have access to build applications.
Monica, that makes sense. I was looking at the website and I saw that you had developed like these TypeScript types for your schema so that you can have autocomplete in your IDE. You're really focused on the developer experience, which I would expect nothing less from you. Do you think that this also applies to or can be used by people that are starting to adopt low-code, no-code platforms, like on Microsoft and Azure and things like that?
Yes, that's a very good question. So our audience is a developer. So that's why we're concentrating so much on the developer experience and user experience. But we want to make it so easy to use that you don't have to be a developer. You can also be a non-technical people. Imagine you are a company and the developers from that company would like to build their application on top of Zata, and then you collect in the database, you collect all this data from the users, and then you have other departments in the same company like marketing and so on that are non-technical people. They would like to build internal tools or CRM type of tools on top of the data that you collect in the database. So different use cases, but the same service. I think this is something that we realized when you're building this platform on top of Tupu. So we are using Airtable as a storage to store all these mentors and mentees, but also you're using it as an internal tool, CRM type of tool, to do manually the matching between a mentor and a mentees. We kind of were inspired from this model as well.
One of the difficulties that comes up a lot is as time goes on, and we've seen so many databases that focus on developer experience and making things very easy. And a lot of times when you make something easy, it doesn't necessarily mean that on the back end it's very scalable. And yours is new, so you probably don't have users who are doing hundreds of terabytes of data in a table or petabytes of data yet. But we've seen this in MongoDB, for example. People will build their application, and it's just so easy to use, and they can start writing stuff right away. And as their application scales up, the queries that they're running become slower and slower. They're not optimized correctly. The data isn't structured for dealing with things at scale. And I'm just wondering how you're thinking about that in the early days before you reach these scale problems.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So we built from the beginning with the idea to be scalable, and also we are limiting what the user can do, because we have our own API. We are limiting them to do things that cannot break the system. So we have a bit of advantage here because there are all these startups out there that basically what they do, they offer like a NoSQL or SQL database, and they don't, they are limited to their protocols or like their APIs. But the way we do things is that we have our own API, and this allows us to do more things underneath. Basically, the user is not really aware of. So we are taking this into account from the beginning, scalability and zero-time migrations and things like this.
So Monica, let's start talking about the go-to-market strategy for Zata. So right now you're building the product. It's in a free kind of public beta, so anyone can sign up. And you have a note on your site that says eventually we'll, start doing pay-as-you-go. So I don't know if you want to share kind of what you're thinking on that, but is the idea to be product-led for as long as possible? Are you going to hire a, sales leader and a channel organization? Like, how are you thinking about that?
So a few weeks ago, we started to onboard our first users into a private beta. So we have more than 2,000 subscribers on our waiting list, but we decided to prioritize companies that have a use case or a new urgent use case. So we started with two categories of companies: nonprofit organizations, and the other one is startups that are starting now, and they look at other existing options, and they decided to go with Zata because it offers more functionality for them, so they don't have to re-implement this themselves. At the end of the summer, we'll have a public launch where basically everyone can sign in and everyone can have access to the product. In terms of marketing and the go-to strategy, so our audience, like I mentioned, is a developer. We need to have a focus on like what kind of things we need to do in order to have the developers excited about. So basically write blog posts, go into conferences, create different videos with, for example, we can have sample apps, then we can have blog posts about them. Also, we can build different integrations. So we have partnership with Netlify and Vercel to build the strong integrations with them. They're also investing in the company. At least for the first year, I think we're gonna have DevRel has a key role in our company, maybe more than other companies. So they are responsible for getting new users, building a community around this, getting feedback from the community, and then at some point we'll bring SAs into the company and build a sales structure, but not yet.
Do you have an idea in mind of like what kind of milestones you need to hit before you start investing in go-to-market? I'm just curious as like how you think about that.
When we're going to start with the sales, hiring a sales team, you mean?
Yeah, is it like you want to get to a certain level of adoption within the community or?
Yes. Every step we do, we start to get a lot of feedback from the users, which allows us to kind of know we are and assures us that we are on the right track, that people really like our solution, and they are very like based on like the feedback and how many users are subscribing already to use the beta So I mean, I don't have like an exact time, but I'm always like for the idea that you need to be more efficient and not try to hire a big team just because you have the feeling that this might be or might be a good timing in just 1 year from now. I think you have to go in and see how this evolves and when exactly would be a good timing for it.
Yeah, like you want to see momentum and adoption and successful outcomes and things like
Yeah. So far, we just got credibility, if you want, from the users that we are building the right product.
Well, I think if you didn't have it, you wouldn't have been able to raise $30 million.
that.
Certainly your users are liking what they're seeing. Can you say what cloud vendor that you run in?
Yes, we are using AWS for now.
Solely. You're not doing a multi-cloud strategy yet.
Not now. So the idea is that it's really an advantage for us to use as many services as possible in AWS because we have a small team. This kind of makes us more efficient so we don't have to manage services ourselves.
Since you're building a SaaS company, how do you think about open source? I know you guys have a GitHub page and all that. You mentioned DevRel, which I, of course, liken to open source, but that's just because I'm biased towards open source. Like, how are you thinking about that as a strategy? Where does open source begin and end, and where does proprietary begin and end?
So I have mixed feelings about that. So I think it's kind of mixed feelings because there isn't really a successfully a database company out there that is not open source. The advantages of open source is that you can build a community around it, and this is something that you can also build without having an open source project. But there is always the option to have an elastic license. Even for those companies that are entirely open source and have an Apache license now, I think there will be a time when they have to switch to an elastic license or something equivalent, right, to an elastic license. Definitely, we're going to open source some parts, but we didn't decide what exactly we're going to open source.
Do you have or are you planning to build any sort of on-premise version?
No, I'm really a big fan of Datadog and how they did it. I think they did a good job in how they managed to attract the community around this and how they and their strategy in creating content. I think it's something that we can have a lot of things to learn from.
I asked because even for the product I work on, DynamoDB, which is a cloud-only database, we have a local copy that developers can use and run on their laptops so that if they're disconnected or on an airplane, they can still build their app. So I didn't know if you were even thinking about a non-prod local version or something.
No, we are not thinking about this, at least at the moment or in the next years.
I don't see anywhere on the site where it says you're remote first or anything like that, but you've been working at remote companies for a long time. Is that the plan for Zata, to be remote first, remote only? How are you thinking about that?
Yes, we are planning to be a remote first company. And so I've seen in my career how important it is to be a remote company and how important it is to be able to attract the best talented people out there. I think from my point of view, what the team that you have, it's what makes the difference between a successful and not successful product. So I think it's very important to be able to hire people wherever they are in the world and not be restricted to a city or to a country. There are lots of logistics that we need to figure out. At the moment, we are concentrating to hire more in US and Europe, but as we grow, we'll definitely extend to other parts of the world.
Yeah. Well, I noticed Tudor posted the blog about your offsite for your fully remote team. I love that you're doing that. I think that's just such a great thing. I learned about that all, at my previous companies. We do it at my company now too. When you plan something like that, why do you do these in-person offsites if you're a remote first company?
Yes, seeing people in person it makes a huge difference. This is something that you miss over Zoom, right? Even though you can have casual conversation over Zoom, you miss this to go to dinner or to have a longer conversation chat about different things, not necessarily about work. But we are like geeks, right? So we like to usually talk about like what kind of features we like to add into the product, what we are excited about product and things like this. So this is what makes us excited about. And I can tell you that every time we had this offsites in this company or in the previous companies, you always feel like you are more energetic and you come home like, now I want to do all the things that I had in plan and we discussed in the offsite.
Well, since we're talking about inspiration here, and one of the biggest jobs of a founder is to excite people about the product externally while you're raising money and customers and all that, but also to keep your employees excited about it. Is there anything you do? You think you do consciously to get that inspiration going?
I'm always encouraging people to drive projects by themselves. And actually, what happens naturally is that if you are empowered, like now I'm kind of leading this project, I will do my best to succeed in this project. So, and my role as a manager is to support them. And like if they fail, it's like you don't have to tell them first like you failed, because they will like have less courage next time to take the lead of the project. You always have to be there for them. So my idea is like, I think that the role of a manager is to make people happy. When you have happy employees, they are building amazing projects, amazing products, and you can have a big impact on the market.
I think that's important about happiness. And I think some people might say, oh, well, you're being soft or whatever. But people do their best work when they're in a good mood. I think that's fairly obvious to most people. But making your employees happy or keeping them happy doesn't always mean that you're bending over backwards and doing whatever they want and things like that. There's a balance. And I think, I don't know, Monica, if you would agree with this, but like the type of people that we would want to hire are the ones that get a lot of fulfillment out of being challenged and growing constantly.
Exactly.
And that is a happiness, right? That makes me happy when I'm growing and being challenged. It might not always feel good at the moment the challenge comes, and there's that conflict and uneasiness that comes with that. But eventually when you power through that and you come out the other side, it's like, wow, I did it. I'm ready for the next challenge.
Yeah, and you feel so energetic when you are creating things. Yeah, so that's why I tend to hire more people that they were founders before. They like to lead projects. I don't really like to hire people that just expect to give tasks, because I'm really against that as a manager. I think this is like just giving tasks to the engineers. I think this is what is killing innovation. And for me as a manager, my role is to empower people to come with new ideas all the time, and basically like Zata, for example, we have lots of idea flowing together, right? So the ideas is like are not coming from the manager, and like they can come from multiple sources. And I think this is very important, because imagine you as a manager, you probably have like 5 minutes time to think about the feature. Like, how can you possibly do a better job than an engineer that is thinking 24 hours about this feature, right? So that's why I think you have to build, if you want, an infrastructure to encourage them to take this lead. And this is something we had at Elastic, right? So this is something that I learned from Elastic as well.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about the companies you've invested in. We can talk a little bit about them if you want to specifically, but I was curious how you decided to invest in Tactic and Wander. So maybe we can talk kind of through what they do and how you decided to invest, if that's all right.
After my experience with the seed round, because it was really difficult, I wanted to have a diversity in the cap table, and this was so difficult because women leaders or women in general, they tend not to be investors as an individual person. They tend to invest through a fund, and basically, I decided that we need to change that, and I decided that I'm gonna be an angel investor in order to help other companies have support and also have a more diverse cap table.
Does your experience investing in these companies help you as a CEO at Zata when you talk to your board? Because you sit on both sides of that table depending on the situation now, right? In a way.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it changed, but definitely, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm very impressed in how Wander. So Wander is a luxury version of Airbnb. And I was so impressed about the team, and I decided to be part of their Series A. I think they do an amazing job in how they are advertising and how they build a community around this. And I'm passionate about traveling myself, and this was one of the issues that I also had, because when you go and if you want to work from different countries, especially that there are now more and more companies that are a remote first company, so this allows you to go and work from anywhere. But the problem is that sometimes you don't have a good internet connection. Usually on Airbnb they say that they have internet connection, but they don't really specify what kind of internet connection. And for most of the people, like a very normal internet connection will be okay, but not for to do Zoom meetings and things like this will be a really horrible experience. And they do this really amazing. They provide you like with a desk, with everything that you need to be able to work remotely from an amazing place. And they have their own houses, and they are
They're amazing.
just
I'm looking at them right
amazing.
now.
Yeah,
I'm like, Chad, we should use this site for our next trip.
Hey, I'm down. I'm down.
Yeah, so basically they also give you a Tesla car.
No way.
Yeah, so it's like they have such an amazing idea, and I think
What do you mean?
it
Every
looks
property that you rent comes with a Tesla car to use while you're there?
yeah.
Oh, Steve,
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to be able to afford to use this for our next guy's trip.
Isn't that amazing?
Chad, think of the money we'll save on gas.
Yes, that's
And
one
the
way to
gas,
think
yeah,
about it.
that's kind of
Yeah.
convenient now.
Yeah, and right now I spent $90 filling up my car the other day. I had to stop because I was like, I just can't bring myself to spend more than $90 on fuel.
But how much does your off-road vehicle use while you're tooling around?
Don't ask. Well, that's cool. I really like the idea of Wander. Let's talk a little bit about the other one.
It's called Tactic. So this was the first company that I invested in, and I was surprised. And they are building a product that they don't have any competition. And I was really impressed by the team, and we kind of became kind of friends in a way. In my opinion, it's really great to have all these connections with other founders. I really appreciate that, because you kind of share the same concerns, and especially if you connect with founders that are the same stage as you.
Yeah, I imagine that's important too, just from a mental health perspective, like ideas on how to cope with everything you have to do and balancing work life. I can't imagine what it's like as a CEO.
Unfortunately, what I see is that it's very common to see founders much younger than me, and it's very uncommon to see founders at my age, if I can.
We will not ask you to do the math.
There is this, you start in your career and you progress so much, you grow so much as a person, and I personally think it's a pity not to give yourself the opportunity to start a company at this age. If you have a family, then it becomes more complicated, and I feel like my advice for people, like, don't give excuses to you not to start a company just because you don't have time. You feel like you don't have time. I think the idea that or the mentality that we need to change here or need to work on is that if you have a startup, does if you're working for a startup, this doesn't mean that you won't have any life, you won't have any work-life balance, you won't have any free time. I don't know, maybe there are some companies like this, but I think in the end is important the leadership of the company that kind of empowers and builds a culture that really cares about the work-life experience.
You think that's evolving as we speak with, a big shift to remote when COVID started? There's a lot of people figuring it out right now on how to do this work-life balance, given that we're working out of our houses. Like, I make jokes about the commute from the pool house to the main house, and the only traffic I hit is the dogs, which slows me down a lot. But
You don't just jump in the pool and swim across on your way to work. Like, that's your commute.
I never thought about that. I should totally do that.
Just dripping wet on your
You
first
totally
walk.
need to send us pictures with the pool. I mean, you made me so curious. I really
Monica,
want
I
to
will send
see
you a picture. I'll send you a picture
You
after we're
definitely
done.
need to
Yeah,
promise
I
to
will.
send me a picture.
Yeah, that's so funny. Planes, trains, automobiles, and pools to get to work.
With somebody I remember a couple years ago, they did one of those paddle boards. They did it from New Jersey to Lower Manhattan across the Hudson River, but like
No way.
in a full on suit and tie. But he's out there like paddle boarding through like crazy wakes being created by ferries and stuff.
That's so
It was
funny.
a stunt, obviously, but it was really funny.
That is funny.
Your company is LLC that's based in Delaware, but you're in Berlin. Why did you make the choice to incorporate in Delaware?
That's a very good question. Mainly two reasons. One of them is it allows you to give real stock options to employee, and this is what makes a huge difference. If I will have opened a GmbH, a company here in Germany, I was allowed to only give virtual stock options to employees. So that's kind of the one thing.
Can you explain that? Why can't you give stock options as a German corporation?
Because that's a different structure of the company and
Because we had stock options working for Elastic, and that was a Dutch company.
exactly. At a Dutch company you can, but as a German company you can't. Maybe as you in UK you can. I think there are a few countries where you can, but I think in most of the countries you can't give stock options. So that's kind of one of the things. Second is because if we are a US company, that we have access to more VCs, also from US, so we are not limited to investment from Europe, which kind of makes a huge difference.
What split do you have in terms of American investors or VCs versus other countries?
So I only have 2 European angel investors, like 2 of the founders of Elastic, Shai and Uri Bones. So they are basically both in Europe. Then as VC, I only have 1 VC in UK, and they are super amazing. And the rest are in US.
So you must have left Elastic on good terms if the Elastic founders are investing in your company. That's great.
Yes, they are very supportive, and I can tell you that if it wasn't Uri Bones, I wouldn't have started the company, because I was kind of afraid to start the company by myself, because, single founder, only founder, and also female founder. I had the idea that no one was going to invest in my company. And then Uri said, yeah, no, you will see that this won't be a problem at all. And if it is, yeah, it's
I can hear Uri's voice in what you want to say right now.
yeah. So basically, he kind of supported me, and I was kind of like, how comes Uri is so sure about this? Like, what he knows and I don't know. So he was always supporting, and before starting Zata, me and Uri Bones, so one of the founders of Elastic, we had these long conversations, like hours of conversations, and he was very supportive. And this was, I think, if it wasn't Uri, I don't know if I would have started a company, because you always have this idea that it needs to be 2 founders in the company. And so definitely Uri was supportive from day one, and even now he's very supportive.
Are Uri and Shai, are they helping in any way, advisory or something, or just investing?
Yes, so definitely Uri is helping me more just because he has more time than Shai. Shai helped me a lot as well.
That's awesome. I don't know if Uri really understands the impact he had on people. Like, he had a huge impact on me, because I can hear his voice in my mind right now when I would tell him about something that was like a, kind of an unspoken rule or unspoken framework that I had inherited. And he's like, why are you doing it that way? And I was like, well, I guess you're right. Like, I'm just inheriting what I thought was the right thing to do. And he would always challenge me to think differently. I love that about him. He's
always supporting people, and he is very genuine about this. And I think this is what makes him, a person that everyone would love to work with. And he was super excited to work with us, and he was giving us a great feedback about the product. So he is our biggest fan.
On the same note about starting your company in Delaware, I was Googling a little bit about companies in Germany, being able to start up and give people options. And I know there's a bunch of reforms that are trying to happen right now in Europe at large to make it more competitive of a market, so that companies do get founded in Germany, companies do get founded in Spain. And Monica, since you live in Europe, I just was curious, like in the last 5 years, have you seen momentum and change in the legislative ecosystem around how companies can start up and incentivize employees so that Europe can become more of, silicone whatever?
Things are changing very slow in Europe. What I see is that compared to Packetbit, the company that I started previously, there is a huge change in the VC market. So at that point, there were only VCs that. So basically, when I started Packetbit, there were mostly VCs that were investing in consumer companies, not so much in enterprise company. And having an open source company at that time, like no one really believed in open source and no one really believed that you can make money with open source. Now it's totally different, right? There are specialized VCs that are investing only in open source companies. So there is such a huge difference, and it's like, 7, 8 years. And Berlin changed completely, and there are so many startups also that are doing dev tools now, even in Berlin. For me, the biggest challenge with starting Zata was operations. This is something because I didn't have experience with. So I had experience with growing a team, designing and building a product, go-to-market strategies, but I had no experience with operations. And because you have a remote-first company, the operation side of things, it becomes more complicated. You suddenly have to, respect the legislation in so many countries, and it's very difficult to get resources from different lawyers and different accounting companies that know about all these countries. So you always have to have a local counsel, and so it's difficult to have all this, to build all this knowledge country by country. So operations becomes really a key to, in my opinion, to remote first companies. So I had to start learning, and because this is something you cannot really find information online. And basically the way I learned about this is like, I am a developer, so I took this step by step, and trying to learn from different people, different CEOs, different CFOs, companies or like people that help me understand how operations work.
Monica, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
No, it's your podcast, so it doesn't really feel like a podcast. It feels like more like a family reunion to me.
That's kind of the idea, I think, for this one, so it's totally fine.
That's what we're shooting for.
Yeah.
Next one, we'll do it live in Steve's pool.
Yeah,
That little microphone floating around the pool on its own floaty.
In the elastic pool. That's funny. Monica, maybe to close this out, I have a question for you. All the work that you've been doing, especially recently around like diversity inclusion with the mentoring company you started, if you could make like one hope for the kind of world that your daughter enters into when she becomes a professional, if that's the world she decides to go into, like what would you hope is the kind of change that you could help manifest in the professional world?
Going deep here.
She is the motivation that I have. The goal that we have is really huge, and I'm not very realistic, but from my point of view, if we are changing a bit and we are improving the life of a few diversity employees, that will kind of make a huge success for us. And my role is, like, my hope is that my daughter we don't know if my daughter will gonna be in tech or what kind of environment or kind of companies will be when she will grow up. It's hard to imagine what will be in like 20 years from now. But my hope is that there won't be so much difference between a woman and a male in a company. The main issue that we are trying to solve with Tubu is that once you have diversity in the company, like how we can support those diversity to grow and keep them in the company. I think this is the biggest challenge, in my opinion, at the moment, and this is something that I think we as a society need to put some effort in. I think it's hard, right? But
well, you hit on it earlier when we were talking about, women leaving the working world or the IT world, at least, with a certain pattern, right? When they leave because they have their first child or they get passed up for promotions or whatever. I think that's the hardest part. The easy stuff is like making sure they're paid equally, making sure that, we're not paying men 10% more or whatever. those are easy to do. First, you have to recognize it and make the change, but I think that's fairly easy. The harder part is what you're talking about is like, we can go invest in all these STEM programs, which is great. We should, but no one really talks out loud about this idea that once a female gets into the working world, if they enter into a toxic world, they're not going to stay. So all the work that we did to get women into STEM programs and get them promoted into a company is undone by toxic people.
I think this is the first step to acknowledge it. And I think this is the hardest, right? Because people have the feeling that they're always right. And it's very hard to kind of even realize that you are doing the wrong thing. It's hard to realize that you took a subjective decision. And that's why for me it's important when you are, for example, promoting someone, it's very important to rely on metrics that are as objective as possible, because otherwise it can be a problem also for me. And I think it's hard for you as a company to even like realize that you have a toxic environment in the company.
Yeah, especially depending on where that toxicity stems from, right? If it's from leadership and no one tells truth to power, then eventually people are going to vote with their feet. But it's the other people that don't feel like they have an opportunity to go somewhere else and they feel stuck. Like I feel my heart goes out to people like that, because I used to feel like that, like way too loyal in a toxic environment and not really understanding that I had other options because no one was telling me I did. I just didn't know.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why it's good to have a mentor always.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Unintentional tie back to the mentoring. All right. Well, Chad, should we bring this balloon back down to earth?
Down to the ground. Monica, you're obviously a great role model for women in tech, founding your own company, investing in other companies. And we want to thank you for coming on today. I do have one final question. How do our listeners get access to the private beta of Zata?
There is an option on the website. If you have a use case, just register and we will contact you.
Well, I'm going to be in contact because I want to try it myself.
Definitely. It's my pleasure to have you as a beta user. I really enjoyed speaking with you. It didn't really felt, in my opinion, as a podcast. It felt like more a family reunion. And yeah, we had a lot of good time, in my opinion. And yeah, and you guys are doing an amazing job, I would say, with the podcast. And I would love to see more.
Yeah, everybody, if you can do us a favor and share this episode out on LinkedIn, that's where most people find us, since this is a kind of a professional podcast. We'd appreciate the help getting the word out. We're trying to get as many listeners as we can, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Monica.
Bye.